Farrell, and I'm an AIPM member and the committee lead for the National Project Controls Community of Practice. For those who are new to AIPM's Project Controls Community of Practice, the Project Controls Community of Practice is for professionals and trainees engaged in the quantitative areas of project management. Key disciplines include planning, scheduling, cost estimation, earned value management, performance management, forensic assessment, risk management, document control, and the project management methodologies that integrate the people, tools, systems, and processes who use them. Our presentation today is with Hendrik. It is about adaptive project management, a risk management technique for complex infrastructure projects. Please watch this presentation before joining us for a live Q&A panel session with Hendrik on the 18th of March from noon Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, using the link provided with this recording. Please come prepared with your questions and thoughts on the subject, ready to partake in the discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce you all to Hendrik. Hendrik Lawrence is the owner of StratFlow, a company that provides solutions to project-focused companies that are looking for immediate and significant results. He helps his clients to achieve breakthrough performance by clarifying the inherent simplicity in complicated and pressured environments and focusing their effort on the few critical leverage points that affect their system. Welcome, Hendrik.
So as Keith said, my name is Hendrik Lawrence. I'm a management consultant who trained as a physicist, and I have advanced qualifications in polymer science, theory of constraints, an MBA, and knowledge of complexity theory. The critical chain project management, also known as CCPM, comprises a very large part of my theory of constraints accreditation. Apart from global consulting experience in mining, construction, and manufacturing, I also have director-level experience in manufacturing and supply chain. I have published and lectured on strategy, productivity, engagement, social license, and digitalization. I left the corporate world and I started StratFlow to help businesses capitalize on the many opportunities that they miss. StratFlow also helps clients look for the inherent simplicity in complicated and pressured environments, and then help them to deliver breakthrough results by focusing their efforts on the few critical leverage points. So thank you again for attending this webinar today. Project controls are no doubt necessary for good performance, but are they sufficient? We've all seen examples where project controls are the first thing to be discarded on distressed projects. Even with the best controls, many large projects still fail. So the question I would like to ask and hopefully address today is, how can we increase the probability of project success and simultaneously get synergistic performance from maintaining good project controls? To do this, we're going to look at large, complex projects from the perspective of what makes the flow of work difficult. I will call these issues constraints and show that they are dynamic and shift during the life of the project, with consequences for how we should adapt to best manage them. Management instinctively knows that the earlier they identify major issues developing, the better the flow of work and the better the results. But there's the problem. The hierarchical structure of our organizations, which of course is a prerequisite for survival and success, makes it difficult for this information to travel to where the decisions are being made, and also to get the information in a format that it can be acted upon. So therefore, in the last third of our talk, we will look at different ways of making project workflow easy, ending with a process that we call adaptive project management. We will show how this allows management to stay in touch with the issues developing where the work is done. And we will go through a case study to show how this delivers value. So project management as a discipline has been with us for more than 100 years. And yet, around the world, large projects, and especially major projects, are almost certain to run late or overrun in cost. According to the Project Production Institute, worldwide, the construction industry has increased productivity by less than 1% per year over the last 20 years. And there are some tier consultants that believe that there's been no improvement. So there should be no surprise that project leaders and managers feel overburdened and have sleepless nights worrying about problems. such as, I have no idea whether we're in trouble or not, all seem to be on track until the end of the project, and then it's clear that it's not. As we near the end of the project, our contractors are having to choose between financial survival, which is completion on time, and safety, and it's clear that they're choosing the former. The meetings we have are not productive. By the time we figure out what's been done, we have no time to figure out what needs to be done. Why do we spend so much time doing status reports? Will I have the necessary resources, specifications, material, information, designs, authorizations? Will they be available on time? In my experience, construction projects often start with incomplete engineering plans, designs that are outsourced, and labor contracts that are late. Adversarial relationships with contractors make win-win execution even harder. Each side is driven by its own competing profit-generating practices and safety motives. And under these conditions, finishing a project within budget, on time, at a prescribed quality level, and with stakeholder satisfaction can be very difficult. So what can we do to get our projects on time and within budget? Well, perhaps more project training is the solution. So this graph is from PwC Insight and Trends in 2012. Those organizations that focused on formal training did see an overall benefit, but just not on adherence to budget and schedule. These went the opposite way, as you can see. According to the authors of this report, it's because the training programs did not include sections on budget and scheduling estimation. So can we fix this issue with better training? We will get back to this in 2 slides. The project management body of knowledge is a well-known methodology used for project management training. The emphasis is on control, and it deals with the categories you can see in this slide. What is interesting is that there's little focus on execution and making work flow. About 10 of the 450 pages deal with execution. Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems at the level of thinking that caused them." This graph shows the utility to society of new paradigms as they develop over time. Each age builds on the best of what came before until it hits a blue bubble. So let's start with the industrial age. This was the time when Taylor's ideas of scientific management, reductionism, and humans as cogs in a machine became widespread. The idea was to manage risk and efficiency. Planning was with known knowns. Companies such as Ford and General Motors adapted these ideas and set the stage for tremendous economic and productivity growth. The hierarchical organizations and processes they developed are very well suited to the need for efficiency and control, without which no organization can survive. They perfected the allocation of work to departments with clear reporting relationships and accountability, and using planning, budgeting, job specifications, and performance management systems. Consequence of this was that the decision-making responsibility moved from the front line up towards management. It solved the most important problems they had, but managers still had difficulty in getting crucial information for good decisions in time. We then transitioned to the information age, where systems thinking became popular. The focus was on engineered systems and processes. Humans became seen as part of a system. We managed robustness and effectiveness. Planning now includes known unknowns. The information age made computing power and interconnectivity cheap, and it allowed us to hard code our mental models into organizations, processes, and behavior. The information age also enlightened that the industrial age was all about order. We believe that our organizations are now caught in the second blue bubble, a place where the old methods are struggling to deal with the aspirations of society and workers, and where they're delivering diminishing returns. There are many indicators for this. We've already heard that construction labor productivity has not improved for a long time. From 2014 to 2017, employee engagement in Australia dropped for a highly engaged category from 24 to 14%. Some thinkers have labeled the trend in business over the last 20 years as the dehumanization of the workplace. We are now at the onset of the ecology age, and this is where we become aware that planning should include unknowables and unimaginable issues. The ideas of complexity science tells us that the properties emerge out of the system and cannot be predicted upfront. We need to focus on networks of humans and their relationships, humans as storytellers. Before we go to the next slide, I would like to highlight one of the main causes of today's crisis period. Eve Moreau of Boston Consulting Group proposes that at the same time that information available to managers have dramatically increased, so has the level of competition and the number of KPIs corporations try to satisfy. And many of these KPIs are contradictory, leaving workers and managers confused. For example, trying to become more effective and efficient, we try to make roles clearer, make employees accountable, and measure inputs and outputs better. Ives claim that the drive for clarity and accountability triggers a counterproductive multiplication of interfaces, middle offices, and coordinators that add obstacles. And the more complicated the organization, the more difficult it is to understand what is really happening. So managers need summaries, reports, key performance indicators, metrics. People put their energy into what can be measured at the expense of cooperation. People spend their time in meetings, writing reports they have to do, undo, redo. And we will see later that these conditions lead to complexity, where human behavior becomes very difficult to predict and manage. Boston Consulting claims that teams in complicated organizations spend between 40 and 80% of their time on wasteful activities while working harder than ever. We need employees to cooperate, to trust others, and work for the good of the organization. But they will not do this if it means that they will perform worse on their own metrics. This complicates effective decision-making and coordination even more. We are caught in crisis and we are unable to make the required transition because our understanding of the world is not complete. Physicist Murray Gell-Mann coined the term complex adaptive system. Organizations that manage projects operate as complex adaptive systems. This is a very different way to what we usually look at when we look at the management of projects. Some important characteristics of such a system, you can see illustrated here. There's no effective central control, or rather it's much more limited than what we think. Think of the culture. Non-linearity. This is better known sometimes as the butterfly effect, where we have tipping points. Feedback loops cannot be broken into parts to be studied in isolation. Properties are emergent. Non-reproducibility, the story of the three blind men, each feeling a different part of the elephant and deciding that it is something totally different. Systems thinking and complexity science helped us to realize that there are not one, but three systems in the real world. We have order, complex, and chaotic. And the presence of these three systems in our organizations make them complex adaptive systems. Industrial and information age thinking are ordered system approaches. 85 to 90% of project work resides in the order system. This is the domain of predictability and linear cause and effect. Sometimes there are time delays between cause and effect, but our experts know how to handle that. This is the realm to use theory of constraints, and where we can also manage order using fixed and governing constraints. And when we over-constrain our system by overusing fixed and governing constraints, human effort derail, and we get suboptimal results. Chaotic is a very big threat to the survival of the project and the organization, and management's job is to take drastic action to move the project out of this domain and as fast as possible. Fortunately, we seldom land in that area. But complex is more interesting. And as mentioned before, it is uncertain, unpredictable, and ambiguous. Cause and effect can only be figured out in hindsight. Humans tend to behave in a particular way, but there's no guarantee that they always will. This means we can't control an individual's behavior. So, when we want to facilitate change, it's much easier to change how we contain, couple, and link things to influence relationships and interactions. It's worthwhile to specify the fixed and the governing constraints in more detail. And as shown in this image, there are policies, guidelines, practices, standards, rules, regulations, and compliance checklists. When they are at the right level, stability, predictability, repeatability emerge. But when there are too many, instead of enable, they disable. Annoyance, confusion, frustration, anger, and even sabotage may emerge. When we get to the adaptive project management solution, we will show how we probe and adjust the governing and fixed constraints using a human sensor network. To improve our project performance, we need to make better decisions. And for that, we need the right information available when we make them. You've probably seen the cartoon displayed here, the difference between what the client wanted, what was specified, and what was produced. It would be funny if it wasn't so painfully true. It is notoriously difficult in construction to ensure that work flows smoothly while staying safe. The level of uncertainty and interactions are huge, and no two projects are alike. Senior management needs to bid for projects, negotiate terms, assemble consortiums of contractors, and then devolve the requirements and resources to lower levels of the organization for execution. The flow of information downwards works reasonably well, but we soon discovered that the reality on the ground is not the same as it was imagined by those doing the planning. Work is done versus work is imagined. You might have heard about that before. No middle manager controls all the resources needed to meet the KPIs. They need support from other departments such as engineering, design, procurement, and HR. These resources are controlled higher up in the organization by people who are too far away from daily activity to understand the independency and the variability that those on the ground struggle with. To make this more difficult, this information cannot be effectively summarized and captured in spreadsheets or in reports for the decision makers in the organization. It's a widely held belief that senior management are better placed to know what resources are required and what trade-offs need to be made. Therefore, middle and frontline management duty is to execute efficiently with what they've been given. It can be clearly limiting to complain too much. For these reasons, information on problems developing in the system does not travel upwards to the senior team who have the authority to take action. When the problem becomes obvious, significant costs and delays have already been baked into the cake. Often the first sign of difficulty developing is that the sequence of work starts to deviate from what is optimum. This creates coordination problems, rework, replanning, and it starts to overload crucial scarce resources. These become the limiting steps in the project completion rate. The project may still seem to be progressing since contractors get paid by the percentage of work deemed to be complete. The incentive is to complete work, even if quality suffers, or if work will have to be redone later. We need to take one last detour and look at constraints from a theory of constraints perspective. We will use these ideas in solution 1. Which of systems A or B are easier to control and predict behavior? We need to know each system's degree of freedom. In other words, what is the minimum number of points you have to influence to impact the entire system? Well, if the parts in system A are independent, we need to impact 4 points, where in system B, we need to impact only 1. In system B, we may need only 1 set of KPIs, and in A, we may need 4. So with the theory of constraints, we try to find the inherent simplicity in systems. The next question then is, are all the points in system B equally able to influence the behavior of the system? This brings us to the idea of constraints. In every system B environment, at a particular time, we have 1 point or department or group that have the lowest capacity to deliver output. That is the point that we will choose to manage the system. We call it a constraint or a leverage point. In our experience, project managers and teams are often overloaded with information and decisions that do not help with the delivering of the desired result. StratFlow has had 3 fundamental insights that we believe help our clients deliver exceptional results. The first is major projects are planned, scheduled, and cost, assuming reasonably stable, predictable conditions. However, little preparation can be done about unforeseen and unexpected problems due to uncertainty and complexity. Number 2, project execution speed is governed by only a few constraints. And lastly, 3, these constraints can be difficult to identify and manage since they shift, and information or bad news does not travel to where the authority lies to make adjustments. By embracing the best of theory of constraints and the Cynefin framework, which is complexity science, we have assembled a light touch approach. It tells project managers and team in near real time where constraints are, how to address them, and it monitors if the fixes are working. We do not require people to change their systems or structure for our intervention to work. We just enable them to make dramatically better decisions much faster. Identifying constraints and managing them can be very effective. CCPM, or Critical Chain Project Management, enables a significant reduction in project duration and significantly improves revenue, especially in multi-project environments. The most important rules for success are: start with a full kit, never let your most loaded resources multitask. Implementing CCPM can be very effective, but it requires a different way of working for all involved, and some organizations are put off by that. In the last 10 years, there have been excitements simplifying the ease of implementation. But in today's talk, we will only take principles. We now start with solution 1. This is facilitator driven and uses frameworks from the industrial and information ages. It is different to what is generally available in that it combines these frameworks in new ways. From the talk thus far, we have seen that the uncertainty project managers face is compounded by the difficulty with which crucial information travel upwards. The information needed is not in reports. It will show up there much later after the damage has been done. The information is fragmented, and those at the coalface have difficulty in identifying themselves what exactly the problems are in the broader context. At higher levels of the organization, decision makers are too far removed to be able to make better judgments. This approach involves a consultant conducting facilitated discussions with different groups, seeking answers related to what's going well and what is not. The group performs limited diagnosis on the opinions and comments shared. Data can also be collected via recorded interviews with selected people. The consultants then interpret the data and use principles of theory of constraints to generate a type of a current reality tree. This shows cause and effect relationships and identifies the constraints blocking the fast and easy flow of work. In contrast to CCPM, current reality tree diagnosis is easy to introduce in construction. It provides focus to management, and that's something that is often missing. The flow chart that you see in front of you is a generic example for construction projects. Its primary use is to help decision makers see the interactions in their environment, and specifically to focus efforts on the leverage points, there where outside results can be obtained quickly. I think it would be worthwhile for us to go through this sequence. At the top left, we start with a highly pressurized environment, which often leads to projects starting with a design less than 80% complete. Engineering resources are expensive and often just sufficient for average work demand. But we do know that demand for their skills, for these kinds of expensive skills, fluctuate. And as time goes by, the engineers are less available on site, and at pre-start and workflow, coordination starts to suffer. But contractors get paid on the percentage of the work complete. So they use their best judgment and they try to stay in sequence as best as they can. This is made more difficult because drawings are now out of sync with the reality on the ground. The more this happens, the more the engineers and designers get caught up in the office, fixing drawings and designs. The less they are on site and the bigger the problems grow. Bad news does not flow upwards easily, and everyone has incentive to report work being completed so that they may be paid. The technical debt grows, and by the time issues are noticed, much of the damage has been done. There are numerous feedback loops involved that is not shown for reasons of simplicity. Now, the traditional processes and the hierarchy are well suited to the need for efficiency and control, without which no organization can survive. It functions by allocating work to departments with clear reporting relationships and accountability, and using planning, budgeting, job specifications, and performance management systems. This system is efficient, but not suitable to handle rapid change or uncertainty. We are in need of another system running in parallel to deliver the agility that is missing. The image here shows the relationship between our hierarchical system and the agile network structure we require. On the left, we have a standard management structure. On the right, we have a network structure ideal for dealing with rapid change. By creating opportunities for cross-functional activities and improvement projects, we enable agility. This structure deals effectively with interdepartmental coordination because crucial issues come to the surface that's not been dealt with and cannot be dealt with within the departments. Now, a dual management system is still bureaucratic. And in the next section, where we discuss adaptive project management, we will deal with a team of team ideas. For now, just note that the leadership role changes from being at top of the structure to being part of the hub. The team self-organize, managers coordinate the flow of information, and they do not control the activities anymore. They do still control the resource allocation amongst portfolios of experiments. Now, while this method is much lighter on management time and attention than CCPM, it has its drawbacks. It requires a consultant fluent in TOC systems thinking. It can be overly prescriptive in its implementation. Consultants are human and thus fallible. They carry cognitive biases and are challenged to separate out what's really happening on a particular project from a set of beliefs that they've developed over past engagements. Facilitating discussions and interviewing is also resource intensive. To manage time and cost, the number conducted is limited, sometimes to a select few, and there's always doubt if the right people were there. Opinions expressing frustration can be emotionally charged and turn meetings into damaging blame sessions. Drawing the current reality tree flowchart is also a judgmental task, placing filtered data into categorical boxes. The approach captures what's happening at a specific moment. So if a month or two have now passed, does the information hold true? As previously noted, constraints may shift along the project life cycle. If an intervention to fix a perceived bottleneck is launched, how will the project manager quickly and easily monitor the positive or the negative impacts for validation? The current reality tree approach is a prescriptive TOC diagnostic solution that can tackle current PM deficiencies, but it is a reactive snapshot in time. It can bring a project in difficulty back on track, but it doesn't include the proactive capability to detect emergent problems early. So let's have a look at a solution that deals with the risks that we've just mentioned. On this page, we see a dashboard generated using a software service from Cognitive Edge that's called SenseMaker. SenseMaker is designed to convert stories into quantitative data points. Instead of writing reports every week, employees capture stories of what has happened at work today and locate them on the triangle shown. In this way, management is directly connected to what's happened at the front line. SenseMaker can generate a variety of narrative maps from bar charts, triangular heat maps, and 2D contour maps. This allows management to identify the few constraints or the bottlenecks in the project and to track the effectiveness of adjustments that they make here. But it also has a significant positive impact on risk and specifically safety performance. These maps reveal deeper meaning and context, thereby making visible what traditional surveys and opinions do not. The 2D contour map at the bottom right shows the monitoring of safety and productivity on a dashboard. There are many events in the X area where workers had to bend the safety rules to get some work done. This cluster of points may indicate a pending failure and warrants immediate attention. By clicking on the dots, narratives can be read to pinpoint where this is happening. Besides being high risk, the low job completion rate may reveal a bottleneck. Data can be sliced and diced in SenseMaker to further verify a potential bottleneck. As new narratives are entered, the map contour lines automatically change. This means intervention improvements can be observed in real time. Narrative maps are a welcome addition to any project dashboard to gauge progress in the environment. Since narratives describe what people do, essentially, it's a dynamic representation of the project culture. Now, let's say that we identify a constraint and decide that it needs to be addressed. We would ask the management team and selected frontline workers how to go about getting more stories around the green check mark and fewer around the red cross. The next step is to put together safety try experiments to make this happen, and then to follow the success or not by the changing of the map contours. In this manner, we can see very quickly whether our intervention is making the situation better or worse. How does the data collection work? Well, the process is called distributed ethnography. It involves collecting observations of what people actually do. Humans are natural storytellers, and stories or narratives are ideal for making sense of complexity because they include the context. The problem of story misinterpretation by a consultant is avoided by allowing storytellers to signify their perceptions as part of the sharing. This is how valuable insight on past, present, and future PM issues are captured. The triangles are designed to make it easy to provide more meaning behind the experience. On a mobile device, the marker is moved to a position with a finger or a thumb. The closer the marker is to any of the corners, the stronger the elements is present in the story. Between corners signifies a mix. For the how I spend my time example, you can read the 3 scenarios shown. Data entry process normally takes about 5 to 8 minutes. Workers use the app as their daily journal to quickly document their observations and experiences. They can anonymously enter anything they feel is worthwhile to share. And on this page, we see the examples of the stories associated with the dots. These can also be obtained by clicking on the bar as shown. Now, a few years ago, a construction company had difficulty with a light rail project that was starting to show clear signs of running over budget and missing the deadline. Value of the project exceeded $800 million, and the senior executives were also worried about the rising level of near misses and safety risk. When I arrived, I noticed a pressurized work environment immediately. I hosted this series of interview sessions with different departments over 3 days. These consisted of the frontline management, the supervisors, engineering, and contractors. The stories they told were that of difficult work conditions, very long hours, shortcuts that were being by necessity taken by contractors, and worries that the project could not be brought on track again. We captured these anecdotes and a few days later asked a team of managers paired with frontline personnel to analyze the patterns involved and to identify the bottlenecks preventing the smooth flow of work. Major benefit of this process is that when managers are exposed to the problems experienced at the front line, and in the own words of those there, it opens up a level of understanding and even empathy that would otherwise not be there. It's easy to ignore a single comment about something that's not working the way it should. But when more than one employee expresses their frustration about this same issue, managers know that the issue is real and is having measurable negative consequences. Another day was used to make sense of the data in the mapping format we discussed a few slides before. We represented this information as a flowchart with the leverage points that are highlighted, and this provided the common vision around which all participants could align and coordinate effort. In this case, the engineering resources had become overloaded and had to start multitasking, which reduced their capability and capacity even more. From here, optimum sequence was lost and pressure increased. We encouraged the management to create and support groups of volunteers wishing to fix the issues identified. These are the network structures that we showed before. They did this, and within a few months, this project was back on schedule, costs were in control again, and safety improved dramatically. So think about this intervention in traditional terms. How can 5 days of consulting work have such a dramatic effect? It can only happen when we understand that we need to take account of the complex nature of many of our problems. Then we need to enable the emergence of positive outcomes by constraining what we do not want and boosting what we do. This is the more stories like this, fewer stories like that example. Order system controls are important to have, and when they are at the right level, they are actually crucial. But when there are too many governing and fixed constraints, instead of stability, predictability, and repeatability, we get annoyance, confusion, frustration, and maybe even anger that emerges. Adaptive project management is ideal for probing and addressing governing and fixed constraints, according to the more stories like this, fewer like those principle. Adaptive project management holds promise for creating stability and agility in our projects. Dramatic improvements in project outcomes have been observed, and we believe it can be used proactively to prevent projects from becoming problematic. The adaptive project management is a faster, less disruptive, total workforce empowering approach, and specifically so compared to the techniques that we've discussed today. The process to set up online story collection can be accomplished very quickly. Consultant assistance is recommended to launch these interventions and apply TOC techniques to focus on the constraint that is the bottleneck. Now, if you are able to capture around 20 stories by the 18th of March at the link highlighted, we will analyze your data and we will report back during the question and answer session. Adaptive project management can be trialed at low cost for 1 month, but it does need consultant support to set up. If you have questions, you can contact me at hendrik@stratflow.com.au. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Hendrik, on a fantastic and insightful presentation. We hope you all enjoyed the presentation and that it has raised some questions and further points for discussion on the topic. We look forward to joining you again and receiving your questions and comments for Hendrik at our live Q&A session on the 18th of March, starting at noon Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We'll see you all then. Thank you and goodbye.